Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to be examining some Bart Ehrman material. So he did a video recently which is entitled Joseph, the Father of Jesus. And so this has been an issue which I've brought up quite frequently over my days. One person I brought this up with was Stephen Boyce, and so this was brought up actually in a debate, and I thought it was quite an important thing, because when you understand the issues of contradictions in the Bible, you just look at the narrative in the modern Bibles, and they're basically saying that Joseph is the father of Jesus, and so it's quite amazing. And listening to critical text proponents try and wiggle their way out of this one, it's pretty hard to do because this is a glaring contradiction. And so what we see is Bart Ehrman, he seems to be tapping into a lot of this material. I think he's probably exhausted most of his intellectual material, and so what he's doing now is he's going through and just pointing out where people like myself, just laymen who are just concerned with things of scripture and looking at a contradiction and pointing out the elephant in the room, or that the king has no clothes. He's going through a lot of this material and just doing the same thing and saying, well, actually the Bible says that Joseph is the father of Jesus. And so where in the King James, this contradiction does not appear. This is because of textual variants, which cause these massive contradictions. And this is one of the reasons why I think the critical text is a joke. It's ridiculous. So anyway, I was listening to this today, and I just really felt like I had to address it. So what we're going to do, we're going to be going through this video of Bart Ehrman's entitled Joseph, the Father of Jesus. So this came out just the other day, the 27th of December, so it's quite new. Now, I had been going through some of Bart Ehrman's material, but I just got busy. And sometimes, too, you listen to an entire hour of Bart Ehrman, and it's just quite exhausting, not in a sense because he has so much to say, but because he just goes to the bottom of the barrel every time something's mentioned. Like even with this one, he just goes straight to the bottom of the barrel and just says, well, Joseph was probably the father of Jesus. He just doesn't even entertain the thought that, there's any type of miraculous thing or the Bible narrative is correct. He's just like, well, he just goes, well, scholars say this. And so if scholars have said anything along the line, he'll mention that, and he'll go to the worst case scenario, unless it makes him look stupid, and then he will maybe go up a rung or two. But with this issue, he is really scraping the bottom of the barrel. And so let's get into this. This video goes for 48 minutes, so I anticipate there's going to be about 3 parts of this. Now, if you saw that this said part 2 on it, my design team, which is me late at night on Adobe Illustrator, I actually did 3 headings, and I just picked up the wrong one on StreamYard. So hopefully it auto corrects itself, because I did re-upload part 1, but it might say part 2 on it. So just so if you're like, oh, I missed part 1, you're not going insane. It's my mistake. So let's just start this video.
Welcome to Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman, the only show where a 6-time New York Times best-selling author and world-renowned Bible scholar uncovers the many fascinating, little-known facts about the New Testament, the historical Jesus, and the rise of Christianity. I'm your host, Megan Lewis. Let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Misquoting Jesus. The last time Bart and I recorded, we spoke about Jesus' mother, Mary. But what about Joseph? What role does he play in the story of Jesus' birth? And what other stories about him developed in Christianity's early days? Do the non-canonical Gospels tell us anything that the New Testament doesn't? And why does he have such a secondary role in Christianity? Before we get to that, though, Bart, hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. So while we're recording this, I'm looking forward to Christmas. When it's playing, we've just finished Christmas. So, right, December 26th is, for me, is always kind of like somewhere between kind of anticlimax letdown and a relief, because it's always, you know, Christmas. It's funny how a lot rides on holidays. I think it's one reason that so many people find Christmas a difficult holiday instead of a time of joy is because there's so much pressure put on the day that it can lead to very difficult things. And obviously,
I mean, those glasses, they're doing my head in already. The glasses the girl's wearing, it just makes her look like she's tilting her head sort of sideways. It's the I know they're trying to stay up to date with the fashions, but that's pretty ridiculous. But anyway, Bart Ehrman's sort of like, oh, Christmas, it's a really sad day for a lot of people. And I mean, yeah, if you're an agnostic, if you're an atheist, it's quite a depressing time. And if you're not born again, of course, people are just going to be a problem because you're going to be so narcissistic and self-centered that you're not going to enjoy giving. I mean, can you imagine this guy's become absolutely hugely wealthy? He has a lot to give. He could. Why doesn't he go down to a homeless shelter and give gifts to kids and stuff like something that would give him absolutely true joy and things like that? But it's just sort of like, Christmas is a horrible time of year, and I'm busy, and I'm a scholar, and and he really has this. I sense this amongst my American brethren that when you have the alphabet soup after your name, you're sort of up higher on the ladder. And even with debates, because I'm toying with the whole concept of doing some debates, and I was thinking I really need to be schooled up on how to do debates, because most people who do debates in the debate circuit nowadays are not debaters. They don't understand. I don't really understand debate. I just jump in there and just say try and say the truth as far as I can see it. But the whole concept of an opening statement and then rebuttals, and then some people pull all the rules out while you're in the middle of the debate, and you're like, oh, look, I don't really know how to debate. I'm just here, just fumbling around. But I was listening to a debate between Michael Brown and some other guy on One Side Boyce. And Michael Brown was like, man, you are totally destroying this debate because you don't know the rules. And I was thinking, man, I really should brush up on the rules myself. But you have Bart Ehrman, and he is whinging about how bad Christmas is. And I'm just thinking, man, you're absolutely so privileged. But unfortunately, what seems to happen in the United States is, and I guess this is in the UK as well, and it's here in Australia. I'm not just saying it's just an American thing, but there are a lot more Christians in the limelight in United States. And these guys tend to look down on everyone. It's like the James White syndrome. Like, he's up on a throne, and you sort of got to beg for his attention, and then he can just sort of brush you off in a second. And the magisterium has spoken, you're banished, sort of thing, and you're no longer part of his circle or whatever. And I really feel the arrogance coming from Bart Ehrman when I listen to him, and it's quite sad in a sense where, he's a very successful author. I don't gel on what he's writing about because I believe it's quite deceptive, but it's sort of sad in a way. Here he has all this money, everything he ever really wanted, and he looks down upon people. And he, even when he's talking about Jesus being a carpenter, he's sort of like, oh, it's like people at Harvard just looking at the workers outside. They're just a lower class. There is a real classism in a sense where I tend to know people who are farmers and mechanics, and they can know things. They can be scholars in their own right. And a lot of people who are just average people, they actually hide the fact that they're just normal average Joes with average jobs. Like, it's funny because I do follow David Pullman a little bit, and James White, one of his main attacks against him was that he worked at Dillard's. which is in the United States apparently like a clothing store, a bit like a Kmart or something like that. And it's like, you work at Dillard's, sort of thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a chimney sweeper or you don't have to be in Harvard. You don't have to be, in the academy to figure things out, So anyway, I'm already digressing.
The families get together sometimes when they don't want to, and when they, but in my case, we've spent Christmas for many years at Sarah's mom's house in Woodbridge, which is in Suffolk in England, and it's always great. We really enjoy it, but it can be fraught for some people. How about you? You looking forward to the day?
I am. I enjoy Christmas Day very much. And I really enjoy the day after Christmas in the UK, as you will know, Bart, is Boxing Day. Yeah. And it's, for our family, kind of a continuation of Christmas. We kind of get up late and have a nice breakfast together. We will usually have like old family friends coming over. Or at least we did when I was a child. Obviously, I don't live at home with my parents anymore. But I have very, very fond memories of Boxing Day, and trying to recreate that for our children, just having a nice relaxed day that they can play with their presents and have good food. And
now, I didn't realize until this podcast that America doesn't have Boxing Day, because some of my illustrations I've used a chronological sequence, and I'm like, well, you have Christmas, then you have Boxing Day, and I've used this in debates, and it's sort of come to light that Americans don't have Boxing Day, where here in Australia it's just something that's just on the calendar. And so, yeah, I didn't realize Americans don't do that.
Spend time together.
I think most Americans don't know about Boxing Day, and those who hear it think that there's some kind of athletic contest going on. But so it's that was tradition. So I've heard a number of stories about this, but I think I've got the right one, but I probably don't. That the certain people who were the servants would be given box lunches that day. Is that right? So
yeah, so it's very, very classist, but the origins are, it was the day where servants typically would be given the day off and be given a box of food and maybe gifts to take home and enjoy with their families, because obviously they've spent Christmas Day preparing Christmas for the family that they work for. So Boxing Day is the day where those who are in service to others get their day off. It doesn't really happen anymore, but I'm sure for families with servants, maybe it is still a thing. I don't know. We don't have servants.
Yes, I don't know too many families with servants in England anymore, but yeah, it was the thing.
But yeah, it's a day off. It's a holiday still in the UK. But yeah, it's a good day. But today we are talking about Joseph, and you, of course, just did a course on the 10th of December, a two-part course talking about this. So if you enjoy this and you would like more information and more details, then you can go and watch the course. The details are at bartehrman.com/Joseph, and you can use MJ Podcast for your discount code. But on not quite such a detailed level.
Save your money. Just read the Bible.
We're going to be chatting about him today. And I wanted to start by asking if all of the Gospels talk about Joseph, Mary's husband, or if he only appears in a couple of them.
Yeah, I mean, he appears in one way or another. He's not named in all the Gospels, but he is referenced in all four Gospels, and consistently named Joseph. The reason that matters, it wouldn't matter for normal Bible readers, because the Bible says his name is Joseph, his name's Joseph, right? But for historical scholars who are trying to figure out like the past and how you use the Bible as a historical source, it really helps if you have various independent sources giving the same datum. And so if you had like three Gospels that said his name was Joseph and the other saying it was Samuel, then you might wonder, and you think, well, that seems unlikely, right? Well, no, it's not unlikely, because the names of Jesus' disciples vary. I mean, the Gospels all say he had 12, but what were their names? And so you can get varies of names, but in this case, Joseph is always the name, and so it looks like the father was Joseph.
Do historians assume that he actually existed? And if they do, then what can we say about the historical figure?
I think historians assume that in one way or another, Jesus' father existed.
And so realistically, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And when you understand Bruce Metzger was one of the main architects behind the RSV, and in 1952, when they brought that out, they had howls from all sides of Christianity, because back then there wasn't really a huge Bible industrial complex. Modern versions weren't really a thing. And so even conservative people, but who followed the critical text, they came out and said the whole concept of a young woman shall be with child instead of a virgin shall be with child. The Alma. This was a huge issue. And so you can see even in the footnotes of the RSV, what they had was in Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, they had a footnote that quoted a Syriac text, and it had some read, or Joseph, or Jesus's father, or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is. I'll look it up as they're chatting. But why have that in there? And what they're trying to do is just look for controversy. And so I was listening to TurretinFan today, because he's often doing Revelation 16:5 stuff. And so I'll just listen in to see if there's anything new or anything that's contributing to this, rather than just be ignorant of it. And he was even saying himself that he tires of some of the unnecessary minutiae in footnotes. Now, he said in his Bible he doesn't have that many. All he has to do is grab a New King James and go through that, and every 10 verses or so you'll be confronted with, well, the NU, the Nestle Aland United Bible Society text doesn't include this verse, or the majority text changes this into this word or whatever. So you confront it all the time. And in the New King James Study Bible, they actually say that one of the reasons why they have so many footnotes is so that you can become your own text critic. And so you can add words as you see fit, or delete words as you see fit, or change them into whatever's in the margin. So if you're going through and you favor the critical text, you can look at the margin and go, I'll have that reading, thanks. It's a bit like a smorgasbord. And so what these Bibles are doing is they're turning everyone into text critics. They're turning the whole world into a bunch of Bart Ehrmans. And so that's why we see so many problems today with Christianity and people doubting the Bible, because which one do we go with? But why would you have a footnote saying, or Jesus's father, in the RSV? So people, even Bart Ehrman himself says that Metzger used to pride himself that he had the ashes of a Bible that this pastor had burnt and sent to him. But rightfully so, it's a heretical Bible. Anyone in their right mind would burn the New World Translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, because it's diabolical. The RSV was a diabolical translation. It had these horrible issues that attacked the deity of Christ. It attacked the virgin birth narrative. It attacked the Trinity. It came against the core fundamentals of Christianity. And so, but you see, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so here we see, Bart Ehrman's like, yes, there's lots of proof in the Bible that Joseph is Jesus's father. Ha, 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 because this is the academy. The academy is just filled with unbelievers. And what you find is every now and then you'll get a group of people like, Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry, and they'll sort of hang around the fringes of the academy and be like, see, we're Orthodox. But really, Bart Ehrman is like one of the true faces of the academy. And this is sort of, these type of programs are like a glimpse into what I would see is really going on behind the scenes. And so these guys would hate fundamentalist Christians like myself, who would be sticklers for saying, well, no, the virgin birth is a real narrative. They'd just sort of roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever. They're into puffing themselves up. They're into selling books. They're serving mammon. They're not serving the God of the Bible. They're not serving the people. They're not serving the church. Why do we have these people? Why doesn't the church just get rid of these people and just ignore them? To me, it's like having 12 prophets in New York who write the Watchtower magazine. All they're doing is causing problems, causing distractions, and people just think, well, they're infallible because, they've got PhDs and, they've got a whole bunch of alphabet soup lettering after their name. They must be saying something. They must know something that I don't. But when you go through their material, they sound scholarly. But at the end of the day, many times they'll just outright lie. They'll just play on your ignorance of things. And once you become schooled in certain things, you realize, hang on, he's not telling you the full story here. Why isn't he telling you the whole story? And so anyway, let's continue.
And I think since he's named Joseph and there's no alternative, there's no reason to think it wasn't Joseph. A lot of times when you get a datum about Jesus in the Gospels, it's one you might question because it seems like it's fulfilling some kind of purpose. It's like a storyteller might want to insist, that he walked on water, because that would highlight something about him that would be significant for the storyteller. But it doesn't really look like the name Joseph is going to give a lot of purchase. It was a popular name at the time, as was Jesus and James, and a lot of these other people have well-known names. And so I think scholars assume there was a Joseph, that he was the father of Jesus. And, there are other things in the Gospels that are fairly consistently reported about Joseph that I think can give us some information about him.
So both Matthew and Luke give a genealogy of Joseph, but they are not the same thing. So how...
You see the smirkiness there. They're not the same thing. To me, this drives me nuts because I know quite a lot about the genealogies in Matthew and Luke. And having studied these for years and years, it's not like it's rocket science that you have to figure out. I mean, even if you just follow, say, answers in Genesis, they have quite a good answer to what this is all about. And so, but you just see Bart Ehrman, they're smirking like, yes, that's another whole issue that I'll probably write a best-selling book about and, and just play on people's ignorance. But all you have to do is just read the narratives yourself. Just line up the people. All you have to do is just go through and see who it's actually addressed to, or who is the main subject of each one of those genealogies, and it's quite clear. And so there's no contradiction. These guys, they actually think that Christians are so dumb that we don't realize there's a difference in those genealogies because they're talking about different people. Now, he even says they're both of Joseph, of this same guy. I mean, I wouldn't, if I was out street preaching and someone said that to me, I would excuse them and go, well, obviously, a lot of people don't read the Bible. They're too busy watching Batman Returns or whatever, and they're not saved, and so why would they know these things? But when you got the world-leading expert, Bart Ehrman, 6 times bestseller, and he's saying this sort of rubbish, it just makes my blood boil. And it just makes me go, well, is he even interested in looking at this? Is he even interested in a truthful narrative about this? You would think that he would say, well, there are, fundamentalist Christians who say this, but we as scholars say this. He doesn't even go there. He's just like, there's just no other answer. The answer is they're both of Joseph. Ha, ha, ha. It's got contradictions. They have a whole bunch of different names. Now, he's probably planting the seeds for another book, so that atheists and agnostics and people of other faiths can go, oh, look how stupid Christianity is. A world-leading expert, but he's world-leading nothing. He says the dumbest and daftest things that anyone who's involved in any type of street ministry, apologetics ministry, they just look at it and just sort of cringe and go, man, you wouldn't last 2 seconds out in the real world. People on the streets don't care if you've got an alphabet soup after your name. They're interested in truth. The Christians who you run into who are debating this type of thing, they they're interested in truth, not just, well, I'm a scholar and I go to Harvard, or I'm part of Chapel Hill or whatever. They don't care about all that. But see, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, it just seems like in some areas, in specifically in the United States, where there are a lot more Christians, this seems to carry a huge weight, and people seem to overlook the fact that what they're saying is stupid, dumb, illiterate, because, well, they're a scholar. So, and when does it get to the point where these people are just sort of pointed out and like, oh, you've got bad scholarship. You're actually not. You say that you're this world-leading scholar, but you're actually you're illiterate on this issue. And he's writing books about this. He's doing seminars on this. Well, surely he should know better than anyone. But when you examine what he's saying, he doesn't know anything. It's like he only knows the worst case scenario, the gutter level, it's all a forgery, it's all fake, none of it's real, it's all just made up, and it's a big fairy tale. It's Disney.
How do we explain those differences? Obviously, the name is the same, so that's fine. But the different genealogies must be doing something different.
The genealogies are really interesting. I'm going to be I deal with this at greater length in that course that I did, and in other places I've talked about it.
He does a whole course on these genealogies. Okay, let's look at how ridiculous his conclusions are.
Many people might know this, but if you actually just look at the two genealogies, they're different genealogies. And,
I mean, who doesn't know that? You know what I mean? It's like, many people don't know this. Yeah, people who are his audience who have no idea about the Bible whatsoever. They've never come across people who know the intricacies of the Bible. They're trusting in Bart Ehrman because of his scholarly credentials, and he's just, anyway.
And in Matthew's genealogy, it actually starts with the father of the Jews, and it goes from father and son. So Abraham is the father of Isaac, is the father of Jacob, and so forth. And you get on down until you get to another person named Jacob, who's the father of Joseph. And so you get the lineage going down to Joseph, and then the lineage breaks because in Matthew, Jesus is not Joseph's son. And so the genealogy is tracing it all the way down to Joseph, and then Jesus is born to Mary. And I think the assumption there in Matthew is maybe Joseph adopts Jesus or something. It doesn't say, but in some way, it's a little bit odd though, because it's giving a genealogy. It's trying to show that Jesus is related to both King David and to Abraham and all these other Jewish folk in between. But it's showing that he's related to people he's not related to. In other words, he's not in the genealogical line. So it's a little bit strange, but
it's not strange at all. If you are a critical text guy, if you follow the modern versions, it's strange. Because what modern versions do in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, they have the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Now, is that genealogy there of Jesus Christ? No. The King James says the book of the generation of Jesus Christ. Now, this generation goes back to, if we look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it says, and these are the generations of the heaven and earth. And so what it's saying is, the creation weeks happened. We're in Genesis chapter 2. And now we're going to talk about what has occurred since the creation. This is this is what's been generated from the creation, the whales, the fish of the sea, the birds, the trees. This is what's been generated from that, and also man. And so then it's going through the story of man. Now, sometimes it will use that word, the Toledoth. It'll use that Hebrew word Toledoth to do with genealogies. It'll say, Adam, gave birth to, Abel, to this other person, and go through a genealogical list. But at other times it's talking about, okay, this is what's happened. This is the historical narrative. This is what it's been generated. So if you turn on a generator in your house, just say you've had a blackout, you go down, you turn a generator on, you could make a list and say, well, this is what was generated. The lights came on. Yet we didn't have enough power for the aircon, but we were able to have fans and we were able to do this and do that. You could write what was generated. So when you're looking at the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, you're looking at, this is a book all about what Christ has generated. So what came from Christ? When Jesus came and went, what came from him? Well, he made the church. He did miracles. He did healings. He died on the cross. He rose from the dead. You could write down a whole list of what Jesus did, which is pretty much what the book of Matthew is all about. So at the beginning, it's got, this is the book, or it just says the book, Vivlos, of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And that's it. That's all it says about Jesus's earthly lineage, is son of David, son of Abraham. Then the next verse is Joseph's genealogy. Now, the reason that Matthew has Joseph's genealogy there is because it's a cursed genealogy. And so it doesn't seem like Bart Ehrman even knows this. There's a guy in there called, I'm pretty sure it's Jeconiah. Now, I have said this wrong before, so I'm just double checking in my mind. Maybe I should just quickly get Matthew 1 up. And he was cursed. The Bible says that no one from his loins would sit on the throne of David. So if this is the book of the genealogy of Jesus, so about the family tree of Jesus, and you go down and it doesn't even go to Jesus, it goes to Joseph, the husband of Mary. But then you'd have to assume that, okay, well, they got together and he's the dad. If this is the genealogy of Jesus, that's where some people go, oh, well, it's just the earthly one. Because he was a stepdad, he sort of came under that umbrella and all other stuff. You can avoid all that by just going, no, there's an introductory narrative in Matthew 1:1. Let me just show you my website here. So Matthew 1:1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So I've written quite a lot about this. And so, okay, of the generation. So it's Genesios, which is basically, it comes from the word Genesis. Okay. Okay, so we've got Stephen Avery hanging around. How did you get Merrill? How did you get Meryl Streep to talk Bible? Funny man Stephen Avery is in the house. So Genesios, of the generation, means something that has been generated. In this case, it was it's what Jesus Christ has generated. The genealogy beginning in verse 2 is of Joseph and not Jesus. Thus, the New King James Version's translation is in error, having the genealogy of Jesus Christ, because Christ had no genealogy except through his mother. And we're going to look at that in Luke chapter 3. So this is something that Bart Ehrman just doesn't go into, because he's got another bestseller on the list where ignorant people will go, oh, there's contradictions in the Bible, Nowhere else in the New Testament does a book refer to anything other than to an entire work. So it's talking about the book of Matthew. Okay, it's not talking about this, like some translations have a roll of the genealogy of Jesus, a list of names of Jesus's lineage and all this rubbish. So it's erroneous to conclude that it's only concerned with the list of genealogy. In the King James Version, Matthew 1:1 has Genesis translated as generation, also translated as nature. So that's in the book of James, if you look at where the word Genesis is translated. But it's never translated as birth or as genealogy in the King James at all, which is a separate and distinct word used in the pastorals. So it's nothing to do with the genealogy. So then I sort of go through a bit of the etymology of the GN sounds. And so hundreds of GN sounding words appear in the etymology of Indo-European languages such as Latin, Greek, and English. The GN sounding is usually associated with production, birth, origin, such as Genesis, beginning, origin, genetics, progenitors, gender, genitals, pregnancy, progeny or progeny, congenial, indigenous, genius, genre, generation. A Latin example being Matthew 1:25, where primogenitum is used for firstborn. Okay, so in Latin, gens means a clan. From Hebrews, Gentiles are foreigners. So Gentile, the GN type of words. In Greek, there are many, even in this first chapter of Matthew, with egenese. So it will have Isaac egenese ton Yaakov, and so the egenese, the GN is there as well. From Geneo, being translated as begat or begot, just as nat with a silent G has a silent G, and some GN sounding words also drop the G, such as Noel with a G. The nativity, it's interesting, the nativity story with a G, song. Other examples are nation, nature, innate, benign. It used to mean well-born. The opposite was malign, but the G sound is maintained in benignant and malignant. The root of this verb is gene, not gen. Okay, you can see this in other compound forms such as genitor or genitor, which corresponds with Latin genitor, Sanskrit genitar. So that's a bit of etymology, it's a bit fascinating there. So that's to do with all the GN type of sounds that would relate to lots of different things. So let's just hone this in a little bit. The exact phrase vivlos genesios is used in Genesis chapter 5, verse 1 in the so-called Greek Septuagint. So I believe the Septuagint was written after Christ, not before Christ. But the Greeks, they used this type of terminology. Genesios is used in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, which is correct because it concerns what originated from God's creation, which also may include the genealogies of men. And so it can include the genealogies of men or just what has come from creation. So you might say what has generated from all the whales being made, well, other little whales, so all that sort of stuff. So Matthew 1:1 is applied to what Christ generated. Okay, so it should not be the book of the genealogy of Jesus. That's a mistranslation. New King James does that. The MEV does that. Most modern Bibles do that, not understanding the genealogy of Matthew 1 or of Luke chapter 3. So then I've got the LXX and what that has at Genesis 2:4 and 5:1. So it has vivlos genesios twice, where really you can tell it's a cut and paste from Matthew 1:1 here. They've just copied and pasted it in here because vivlos is the book. It shouldn't be there. The word book just doesn't appear. It's not in the King James. It's not in any Bible that holds any weight. Anyway, I don't know of any Bible that has that reading, because it just says this is the history or this is these are the generations of the heaven and the earth, and so it shouldn't say this is the book of the history or the book of the generations of the heaven and the earth. So yeah, I mentioned how vivlos in 2:4 is an addition which does not appear in the Hebrew. Okay, it's most probably copied from Matthew 1:1 into Genesis 2:4, erroneously carrying the vivlos with it, which is more proof of a reverse engineered LXX from the New Testament. In Hebrew, the phrase "the book of the genealogy" Sefer Toledoth is frequent in Jewish writings. The other genealogy concerning the lineage of the family of Jesus also appears in Luke 3:23 to 38. So we're going to look at that soon. Excuse me. The phrase vivlos genesios is not merely a title for the first part of the Gospel of Matthew. It is a title for the whole Gospel of Matthew. So it's not just for the first part, like a lot of people say. It's not just a genealogical list. Vivlos genesios means basically this book of Matthew is all about what Jesus did. That's pretty much all it's saying. Then it goes through a cursed genealogy. So we're going to look at that. This is something that Bart Ehrman never mentions, never talks about, because I don't think he even knows. I don't think he would even study this in depth, you know. Where really this is basics. If you go to Answers in Genesis, they've got pretty much the same conclusion as what I've got. So yeah, it's by default for the entire New Testament itself, because Matthew is the first book. Where if someone wanted to say it's only of Matthew, I would be in agreement there. I do have that written there, but I'm not sure about that. So anyway, it must be noted that the generation of Jesus Christ applies to everything Christ generated, including his life, death, resurrection, and making of the church. So yes, here we go. Cursed Jeconiah. Because Jeconiah was cursed, in no way can the lineage of Joseph be part of the lineage of Jesus. Matthew was showing you that Jesus' stepfather was cursed. His lineage could never have anyone who sat on the throne of David in that lineage. So it can't be the genealogy of Jesus. It's impossible. So that's why he was showing people that. He's like, look, I know a lot of people think that this was Jesus's dad, but look at this. He's cursed. Because people back then were like, oh, Jesus is the Messiah. We saw him heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons. Look, we saw him rise from the dead. 100% convinced this guy's the Messiah. And then it's like, okay, let's look at who his genealogy was. Oh, but that's confusing because Jeconiah's cursed. If his father had that lineage, oh no, what's going on here? And so that's why Matthew's like, okay, let's write a list out of the cursed lineage of Jeconiah, of Joseph, sorry, with Jeconiah in it. So as many modern versions of the Bible mistakenly claim that by changing the English rendering of generation to genealogy or lineage, what they're doing is they're actually making this cursed line part of Jesus's line. Good on you, modern translators. Thanks for deceiving everyone. So what I've done is I've gone through English versions compared. Following generation is the Wessex Gospels, Wycliffe, Tyndale, Coverdale, Matthew, the Great Bible, Geneva Bible, Bishop's Bible, King James Bible, Webster's Bible, Elderidge, and then we go through and the one that I've worked on as well, obviously. So following history, so what you'll find is the Jehovah's Witness one, they actually have the history, which is better. It's better than genealogy, but it's still bad because it says the history of the life of Jesus Christ. So I won't read through. Oh, actually, maybe I should. The history of the life of Jesus Christ by Mace, 1729. The history of Jesus Christ by Alexander Campbell in 1835. The Book of the History, that's a New World Translation, 1984. But then it has a footnote, or line of descent or origin, which is way worse. Because did Jesus have an origin? No. But if you look in modern Bibles, in Micah chapter 5, I might actually just quickly go there, because this is very important. Micah chapter 5, verse 2 has this horrible reading. Now it says, but thou Bethlehem, Ephratah, so Ephratah is just like a suburb of Bethlehem, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. Okay. But look at these modern Bibles. Let's just jump straight to like a popular one, the ESV. But thou, O Bethlehem, Ephratah, who are too little among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth unto me one who is to be ruled Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days. Okay, so they have coming forth, which it's not as bad. I did think that they would, maybe they've actually corrected it, but here, NIV here, it says, whose origins are of old, from ancient days. Did Jesus have an origin? It's clearly talking about Bethlehem. There's going to be a ruler coming from there. This is the prophecy of Jesus, whose origins are of old. And so this is the problem with the New World Translation, they have, the origin or descent. So we're going to see why this happened. But so these other ones, Holman's has the historical record of Jesus Christ. So when you look at the Holman's one, they're recognizing that it shouldn't be genealogy, the historical record. But then it has a footnote, or the genealogy. So they get your hopes up, and then the footnotes just let you down. The book of the history, footnote, genealogy, New World Translation, 2013. This is a record of the life of Jesus the Messiah. And then it has or birth. So we're going to see why these guys here think that genealogy and birth are synonymous. We're going to see why. It's because of a textual issue. It's not the textual issue is not in Matthew 1:1, but inadvertently Matthew 1:1 is affected by this reinterpretation. So following genealogy, so we see Murdoch's, Young's literal translation, NIV, the New King James, Green's literal, Revised Young's, World English Bible, the New Living Translation, the English Majority Text Version, the MEV. They all have, the book of the Nativity, a roll of the birth. This is the genealogy, the book of the genealogy, etc. Okay. And so we see here too. I've just pointed out that the New King James, they substitute the full stop here, because see, this is a standalone verse. If you were to go to, say, Mark 1:1, let's go to Mark 1:1 in the King James. It has the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So I'll just go Mark 1 so we can get it in the context. And then it continues on, as it is written in the prophet. So basically, the genealogy here is just the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it's like the Son of God. He's the Son of God. That's the genealogy that's in Mark, which is quite simple. It's quite easy, but it is a verse that it is continuing on with the narrative, because it doesn't go into like someone else's genealogy or anything. But it goes, as it is written in the prophets, behold, I send my messenger. And so it goes writing to John the Baptist straight away. Okay. But clearly, this first verse, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So very similar is Matthew 1:1, where it has the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, full stop. Then from verse 2 down to verse 16, we're going to talk about the cursed lineage of his stepfather. It's not the genealogy of Jesus. So basically, modern versions destroy the first 17 verses of this narrative, and it's quite amazing. And so this is like an overall concept here, which is just not gotten in these modern versions. That they've destroyed the narrative, let alone some of these perversions, saying that Mary's not a virgin, she's a young girl, and then putting footnotes there saying that this is Jesus's father and all this other stuff. It's denying the virgin birth. There's so many attacks against the Christian concept of a virgin birth. And so, the Bible says in Hebrews 7:3 says, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but he's made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continuously. So it's quite interesting. Okay, so then I go through some of the historical information, but I want to deal with this. So let's look at Dean John William Burgon. Now, I have a lot of respect for Dean Burgon. Now, one thing is with Burgon, he sort of would do a bit of a bait and a switch at times. When it comes to the King James, he would say that he defends it 100%, but then he would turn around and not defend it. And so he, in my estimation, he is the father of the modern day majority text movement. And there's a lot of confusion as to he defended the traditional text. He didn't so much defend the Textus Receptus, and he even said that many times. And so, but he had enough bullets to come against Westcott and Hort. And I respect him as a scholar, but I don't go with everything he says. But it's quite amazing what he says here, and I'm in agreement with what he says here. He says, in the meantime, who knows not that all the difference in the world between St. Matthew's Genesis, and notice the NE is capitalized here, in verse 1, and the same in St. Matthew's Genesis, and notice he's got two news here, capitalized. So you have one Genesis and you have a different Genesis. Sounds the same, but one has another new, and it makes a world of difference. Listen to what Burgon says in verse 18. Okay. The latter, verse 18, the evangelist's announcement of the circumstances of the human nativity of Christ. The former, the Matthew 1:1, the evangelist's unobtrusive way of recalling the Septuagintal rendering of Genesis 2:4 and verse 1. I think that's actually a footnote number. So the same evangelist's calm method of guiding the devout and thoughtful student to discern in the gospel the history of the new creation, but thus providing that when the first gospel opens its lips, it shall syllable the name of the first book of the Elder Covenant. We are pointing out that it more than startles, it supremely offends one who is even slenderly acquainted with the treasures of wisdom hid in the very diction of the New Testament scriptures, to discover that a deliberate effort has been made to get rid of the very foremost of these notes of divine intelligence by confounding two words which all down the ages have been carefully kept distinct, and that this effort is the result of an exaggerated estimate of a few codices which happen to be written in the uncial character, viz. 2 of the 4th century being Aleph, 1 of the 5th, C, 2 of the 6, P and Z, and 1 of the 9th, Delta, and 1 of the 10th, Sigma. Okay, so he goes on. Now there's another, so that was Burgon. There's another guy called Solomon Milan. Now this is him here. Wouldn't you love an afro like that? And so a very interesting guy, smart guy, wrote a lot about the Textus Receptus and the King James, and so there's quite a lot of links on my page to do with him. I started to write out his stuff, but it's so complicated. I just wrote unfinished, and I've got a link so he can go and do your own homework. But what he's doing is he's showing the difference. I'll just read this first bit. He's basically saying that what the difference is. Actually, I'll skip his stuff and I'll go through to what I've done here with the revised version. Okay, so this is what Westcott and Hort did. In 1881, the revised version reads as the King James does. Okay, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So it's exactly the same as the King James. So why do the modern versions change it? The problem is with 3 footnotes that firstly causes generation to be redefined as genealogy. So that's one of the problems. Secondly, it causes both generation in the main text and genealogy in the footnote to be defined as birth. So what they do is they have generation means birth in a footnote, and then they also have a genealogy means birth in a footnote. So you get quite confused. You're like, okay, how do I define generation here? Well, it means genealogy and it means birth. Birth means generation. Genealogy means birth. Yeah. They're saying that these 3 words equal each other, as we'll see in a second. And thirdly, birth in verse 18 is to be defined as generation. So that's that whole circle of these 3 being one. These 3 are one. You know. So in verse 1:1, it says the book of the generation. Okay. Then it has a footnote, or the genealogy of Jesus Christ, which is how most of the modern versions read. So then it has the, excuse me, issue number 2. Also in verse 1:1, it says at generation or birth, as in verse 18. Okay. See, like the book of the generation or the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And then it says generation or birth, as in verse 18. So you go to verse 18 and it has, it says birth. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise, and as it has or generation, as in verse 1. So that these 3 issues have caused these 3 words to be conflated and to be joined together. Now, what's the issue here? These 3 footnotes completely redefine generation to mean only birth and destroy the traditional definition of generation, meaning production. Like I was saying, a generator, you turn on a generator, what's produced from that? It's if I said, okay, well, I generated income. I did, we still use the word generated quite frequently to be productive. I generated a lot of controversy by saying that, or but it doesn't mean birth. Okay, you can have children, it can be used in that sense, but not always. So this number 1, it morphs gene, birth, and logy, the book. I said ology. Thus makes Genesis mean birth. So it morphs those together. By making generation mean birth, it nullifies the true meaning of Genesis. So that's the Greek word underlying Matthew 1:1, and generation. So by saying it means birth, it nullifies that reading. By making birth mean generation in verse 18, it nullifies the meaning of Genesis and generation. And so it's just causing huge error. So this 3-fold error in 1881 is repeated in the 1900 American Standard Version. And as we've seen throughout history, this has completely destroyed the narrative. So let's look at a footnote in the Revised Version. Okay, this is what it has. At the bottom of the page in Matthew chapter 1, it has or the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So right at the beginning, it has or, it's the genealogy, and so the modern day writings, or birth, as in verse 18 when it's talking about the generation. And then when we get down to verse 18, it has or generation, as in verse 1. So it makes all these 3 equal each other. It's a bit like the Trinity. It's all, they're all one. So it's more like a modalist sort of concept. So they're all one. Even the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have a huge page at the back of their Kingdom Interlinear translation about history, but then they say quite a lot of good stuff, but then they turn it into meaning the origin of Jesus, which is like, dun dun, no, Jesus is eternal. He is Jehovah the Son. Yes, his body, God was made flesh, but he has been from eternity. So sorry, Jehovah's Witnesses, no cookie for you. And so I'll show you exactly what the issue is. Now we start getting into the Greek here. Now we're still in Matthew 1:1, so you can see in the Greek the Genesis, the Genesios here. It's everywhere. And so if you go to my website, I've got the Textus Receptus editions, whole bunch of manuscripts that I've looked at. Genesis says the same thing. Then you see the generation words are quite frequent until you get roughly around the time of 1865. It says the descent of Jesus. So it's this is or the book of the nativity of Jesus. So you start seeing the history of Jesus. This is the record of the generation of Yesu, the Mashiach, and all this sort of stuff. So what I'll do, I'll jump to verse 18, because I do show here in the Textus Receptus, it has the word Genesis here with with two news, which always means birth. If you were to do a study on that, you go, okay, it means birth. Because, even here, it's the birth of Jesus Christ is on this wise. Now, this verse is very solid throughout all the textual traditions, meaning birth. So, Westcott and Hort text change it. So, there is a minor variant which does not directly affect English translations in verse 18, but does in verse 1. So, it's quite crafty how they do this. They reinterpret this word, Genesis with the two news, to have Genesis with one new in the Westcott and Hort text. So no longer does it mean birth, but it means generation. And so then they're like, oh, well, it's the same. That's why you have those three things being the same: generation, birth, and genealogy. They say, oh, well, they're all the same, because the critical text changes a letter here. Okay, so it's quite amazing. So when you look at, say, John chapter 1, verse 18, and you have monogenes theos in the critical text, or the only begotten God. Now, we know that's a Gnostic heresy. We know the reading should be only begotten Son, monogenes theos. But there were Gnostic groups, changing scriptures and wanting the only begotten God. Now, the modern versions, they want that reading. It's interesting. The Tyndale House text doesn't have that reading. It's like, if King James only, kooky from the South, King James only clan members, I guess we are. If we say it, it's like, oh, well, that's lowbrow scholarship. These idiots, what are they saying? But then Tyndale House has come out and say, no, we think it's only begotten Son. Oh, well, they're highbrow, they've got their nose up in the air like we do as well, so we trust them, They're ever-changing Bible. But what we see is with monogenes theos, what they have to do, they can't have the only begotten God like the NASB had. I mean, that's just like almost a naked verse. It's like, what, you've got an only begotten God? That sounds like something the Jehovah's Witnesses would say. It's like, oh, but we've got a capital G there. We're talking about, James White will say, oh, the unique God. Well, there's a word for unique. It's monodikos. Why didn't John use that? It's been monodikos for 2,000 years. The morphology and syntax of Greek hasn't changed that much in 2,000 years. Many of the definitions are exactly the same. But no, monogenes hoios. We want to have the unique God. We don't want to say only begotten, because people can get the wrong idea that it's a Gnostic heresy, which it is. And so what they have to do after they've butchered that verse, they have to go, well, we can't really just do it in one verse, because we have to go through wherever it has only begotten or monogenes. We have to change that back, or have to change it to what we have molded it into, which means one of a kind or unique. Or so what you'll see is even John 3:16 is affected. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. He gave his only Son, or only begotten Son. See, notice these Bibles have changed it, and they've changed it. So they inadvertently, the John 3:16 is changed because of John chapter 1 verse 18. Okay, so we can see that clearly. They're fiddling around with John chapter 1 verse 18, and inadvertently it changes all these other verses everywhere throughout the Bible. And it's like, oh, you're going to change that as well? John 3:16, just memorized it. Oh, have to change it, And so, but that's what's happening here. So Matthew chapter 1 verse 18, they change it from Genesis, which means birth, with the two news, to Genesis with one new, which is the Genesis that appears in Matthew 1:1. So in the critical text, they don't have the two news one. They have the one new in Matthew 1:1 and in Matthew 1:18. So then they can mold them together and say, it's the birth of Jesus Christ. because they've redefined it. So they're going through and they're redefining these words. So I'll just read through this. I might enlarge it a little bit just in case you want to read along. I know most people will listen anyway. There is a minor variant which does not directly affect the English translations in verse 18, but it does in verse 1. It causes issues in Greek, creating definitional and translational issues. Genesis, this is with the two news, from Beza's Textus Receptus means birth in the King James, and Genesis from Westcott and Hort type text also means birth in the modern versions. Okay. Beza's Genesis is to be preferred as to the better reading, agreeing with the majority Byzantine lectionaries, and got a few numbers there, Jerome's Latin Vulgate, etc. While the critical text reading has the danger that Genesis, nominative singular feminine from Genesios, I'd rather it just actually be in Greek than that. It's so hard to say. Can also mean creation, so that an Arian heretic could misuse the critical text altered reading in a way that he could not misuse Beza's reading of Genesis with the two news. The nominative singular feminine from Genesios. An Arian such as a Jehovah's Witness could claim Christ Genesis or origins or existence. So then I've got James 3:6. I'll just see what I've got there. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is also set among the members that defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. So I'm not sure why I've got that there, but anyway. So the origins or existence date from his conception in Mary's womb. The context of Matthew 1:18 has led those using the critical text Genesis here to translate it as birth, the American Standard Version. As an American Standard Version footnote correctly says, at birth or generation, though then qualifies this as being synonymous with the generation of Matthew 1:1. Nevertheless, the danger still exists that a future version could say that it shows that Christ's Genesis or origins were at his conception in Mary. The critical text opens the door to anti-Trinitarianism. It must be noted that while having similar roots, Matthew 1:1 is Genesis, translated as generation, also translated as nature, never as birth, nor as genealogy, which is a separate and distinct word used in the pastorals. In Matthew 1:16, the concept of birth, egenethe, coupled also with the angel's reference to Jesus' conception, genethe, in 1:18, and the birth, egenethentos, of Matthew in 2:1, is internal evidence for Genesis. Okay, with two news, not one new. In the Nestle Alarm 27 UBS 4 apparatus, it states that Irenaeus and Origin support Beza, etc. Okay, so what is the main issue here? Maybe what I should do, I'll go to Bible Hub. Let's go to Matthew 1:18 in Bible Hub. And we can look at the Greek differences here. So Greek, now there is a little way that you can see Beza's 1598. Now, it's not 100% accurate. If you look at Luke chapter 2, verse 22, it has their purification. Beza clearly has her purification. But if you go down the bottom here, there's a nice little link that says additional parallel Greek. It'll show you just a few more translations. So let's look at Genesis here. Okay, so copy. Actually, I'll just go to the first three letters so we can see where it appears. So we're looking at, the Nestle text having Genesis. Notice only one nu there. Okay, Westcott and Hort only one nu. Majority text. Oh look, majority text has two nus. It agrees with the Textus Receptus. The Greek Orthodox. Oh no, they have one nu there. Tischendorf one nu. Scrivener two nus. Stephanus two nus, and Beza two nus. What is the difference? Well, Genesis always means birth. Okay, this one, Genesis here with the one nu, can mean to be generated, something produced. I generated some income off the internet. My generator it's producing power. It doesn't always mean birth. Where this one always means birth. Okay, and so this is the reason why they're reinterpreting the book of the genealogy of Jesus instead of the book of the generation of Jesus, because of verse 18. So inadvertently, it ruins the narrative. Okay. So Bart Ehrman doesn't talk about this at all. I don't think he knows about this at all. But when we go to 1:1 here, now I'm just thinking of where I should go from here. I should really just get back to what Bart Ehrman's saying, but I think you guys would appreciate me just sort of clarifying this type of thing, because a lot of people don't know this. They have no idea that the first 16 verses in the New Testament are totally destroyed because of a redefinition of a word. And when you go to the Revised Version footnote, it's the genealogy of Jesus, or birth, or generation. It's all over the place. And so there was one more thing that I wanted to show, but I think if I start rabbit trailing too much, it'll ruin the flow, and we're in the middle of a video. So let's continue.
You're going to do it. His mother's a virgin. so Matthew has that. Luke also has a genealogy of Jesus, but there it goes, instead of going from father to son, it goes from son to father. And so it traces it the other way. And so Jesus is supposedly the son of Joseph, and Joseph is the son of so-and-so and son of so-and-so. And it goes all the way back. And in this case, it goes beyond Abraham. He goes back to Adam. Adam and Eve. And so it's a really big genealogy. But there again, Jesus isn't related to it. Both of them give a genealogy of Joseph. Many people have tried to reconcile their differences, but...
So notice what he said there. Both of these genealogies go to Joseph. No. There's two Josephs. And so this is why it's so amazing. He's doing courses on this. How come just a layman like me can just go through the world-leading scholar in the Bible and just point out these ridiculous concepts? The critical text has just made an absolute abortion of the text. And how come someone like me can just come along and just go, the king's got no clothes here, and easily you guys can say, yeah, they're redefining words all over the place. The King James doesn't have these issues. The Textus Receptus doesn't have these issues. Modern versions do. And so Hudson says, does eternal generation of the Son sound logical? Eternal generation of the Son sound logical. I guess if we're going into Calvinistic type of concepts, eternal generation of the Son. So maybe you might want to shed a little bit more light on what you've just said there, Hudson, because it's a bit of a spanner in my my spokes. Sort of come to a halt, and I'm trying to figure it out, but I can't. But what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to go to Luke, where it talks about the birth of Jesus. Now, let me go to King James. Birth, because they also changed the word. Must be Luke 2. They also changed the word Genesis in Luke as well. So maybe I should just look that up. It's so hard when you're trying to find something and you're like, actually, the critical text destroys it elsewhere too. You're like, where's that? So I'll just quickly, I'll have to go to eSword actually. I prefer online Bible as my own little personal tool, but it just seems to have so many glitches nowadays. It just, so I'm using eSword. So what I'll do, I'll quickly just go back to where I was. Excuse me for a second. And we're looking at 1078. Okay. So let's type in search. 1078 search. Okay, so it's not showing anything. I think you have to do a G or something in front of it. There we go. Yeah, so that only appears 3 times. But verse 18, let's have a look. So that's in the Textus Receptus. Verse 18, the birth is 1083. So let's have a look at that. 1083. Genesis with the 2 news. Okay, so it's not really helping. I'm sort of rabbit trailing but getting nowhere. So let's continue on with what Bart Ehrman's saying.
But the reality is they both go back to Joseph explicitly, and in order to show Jesus' genealogical line. The problem is,
see, he doesn't even know that Mary's dad is called Joseph. This is how poor his scholarship is. I mean, if you talk to any street preacher, anyone who's doing apologetics, this is a thing that people will come up. Back in the 90s, people used to come up to me and go, the genealogies don't match. And it's like, yeah, because one is of Jesus' stepfather and the other one is of Mary's dad. And so Bart Ehrman, and the thing is too, it wouldn't take him much to know this. But there's so much information out there nowadays. But he's so busy teaching his stuff. He's got this reservoir of just corruption, and he just keeps spewing forth this stuff. And it's like, when's he ever just going to learn some basics? You go back to basics, Bart, and reevaluate what you're spewing forth, because it's just rubbish.
That Joseph has a different father in the 2 genealogies, and a different grandfather, and a different great-grandfather.
So Joseph has a different father, a different grandfather, a different great-grandfather. So wouldn't you suggest a different Josephs? It's so strange that he thinks that these are both from Joseph, but the husband of Mary. And so I'll just keep going with Hudson's. He says, yes, some Calvinists believe in the eternal subordination of the Son before the incarnation. I believe they call it eternal generation. Okay, so I'll have to think about that one, Hudson. Sorry to let you down and not have all the answers for you. Power of One with a kangaroo on it, so I dare say this guy is from Australia, says, no, that isn't true. Catholics say it's Joachim or some other name, never in any genealogies listed in Matthew or Luke. Actually, it is listed. It's just the way that you say it. So there's Jehoiakim, which is has the Jehovah in it. These names were shortened to Joachim, and there's also another way of saying it, Jacob. Sorry. So the Jacob used to be, it was in the Bishop's Bible and in the Geneva Bible, but that does not. It's not in the King James. They have a footnote saying that some say that it came from the Stephanus' 1550 marginal note. And people felt like they had to add the 14 generations. They had to add these up together to get the exact 14. what some people didn't realize is that some at the end of a 14, that was usually counted, but then it was also counted in the next as the first one of the next 14. So that's where people were just trying to add these things up and get exactly 42 and all this sort of stuff. So they had this extra person, which was pretty much the same person. So that's why I point out that the Geneva Bible is deficient. Bishop's Bible is deficient. King James, spot on. So others say Heli. Matthew is Joseph's lineage. Luke is Mary. It's very easy to show. Yeah, absolutely. And so, and we're going to show this. I'm going to go through this. Hopefully, I've got time today to show this. But this is part one. So when I listened to this today, it just made me mad. I was just like, this guy just doesn't know anything. And it's like, Bart Ehrman, the greatest scholar in the world, greatest biblical scholar. And it's like, man, I know street preachers who've got like a year 9 education. They could run rings around this guy. What's he talking about? And so anyway, Parabon says, I agree. They're both clearly Joseph. Not in their tradition, no. But yes, but that's a different tradition. Saints Anne and Joachim, parents of the Blessed Virgin Mary. No, it says husband of Mary, not father or he begat her. No begets her at all. Okay.
They're different. They are different. It's a different line all the way back to King David. One of the accounts traces the Davidic line through King Solomon, David's son Solomon, and the other traces it through Nathan, his other son, one of his other sons. And so they're different genealogies. And so you wonder, well, why you have 2 genealogies, neither of which relates to Jesus and that are different. And ultimately, I think they're both trying to say that Jesus is related to the Davidic line, and that qualifies him then to be the son of David, which qualifies him to be the Messiah.
Is there anything specific in the differences that speak to the purposes of Matthew and Luke in writing the names that they did? Obviously, they're both indicating relationships to very important figures in Jewish history, King David, Adam. Why would they have chosen different lines of descent?
So the different lines of descent go from David down, and I'm not...
Listen to his apologetic here. The guru, the one who knows all about everything about Christianity. He's the guru, the go-to guy. If you don't know about it, Bart Ehrman will tell you about it. And even on his Facebook, he'll say something like this, and I'll jump on there and say, well, what about this factor and that factor? And people just go, he's a leading expert. Where are your qualifications, dude? And it's like, what? So you have to have his qualifications to pull him over the coals? What if he was a Mormon? I mean, some Mormons have just as much qualification as Bart Ehrman. That there are Mormons who have worked on the critical text. There are Unitarians. There's all sorts of weirdos out there who have a lot of scholarship under their belt. And you have to have gone through their academic, the same academic process as them, to critique them. So say the Mormons and their strange and weird doctrines, I have to go to Brigham Young University and study what Mormons believe and everything like that, just to point holes in their arguments, just to show some basic logic. And so anyway, okay, so following truth, LJ, sorry, I missed your quote up here. It says, Matthew is Joseph's lineage, Luke is Mary. Very easy to follow. Yeah, I think I did show that one, but yeah, that's very, very true. Matthew shows specifically that Joseph cannot be the biological father of Jesus. Luke shows how Mary is of David and that Jesus comes from her. Yes, and so we're going to see soon as well, we're going to watch a video that is by a guy who very clearly points out the issue in Luke chapter 3, and clearly shows that this is to do with the because what happened is, or he'll explain it in the video about how this is the in-laws and how the way that it is written clearly spells out that this is the in-laws. And so we'll see that. Paragraph 1 says, never says begat prior to Mary. That's likely why they put husband there in English versions. Because they know it's not her father. Okay, we got Bluey saying hi, Nick. Hey, Bluey.
Sure that there's any particular reason that one of them chose David's son Solomon and the other chose David's son Nathan. But I think the normal assumption is that they're not making these genealogies up, that they've inherited genealogies from the tradition.
See, basically, Bart Ehrman's answer for everything is these guys are just dumb, stupid goat herders who don't know anything, and they just mess things up. That's his answer to these type of things.
And that any tradition that wants to trace Jesus back to David has to have some kind of genealogy. And there are lots of options because David had several sons. And so the people who are making up this genealogy are simply coming up with names. Most of the names in both genealogies, most of the names are previous to David, and those are coming from the Old Testament, especially the book of First Chronicles, where you have 9 chapters of genealogy, and they're tracing they have those names. But after David, they're kind of on their own. And so they trace it back to a different son, I don't think for any particular reason. But then they just have to come up with a bunch of names. And let me say, people listening to this, and a lot of students tell me that, they've always heard that Jews kept, genealogical records of their ancestry. And I think the reason people think that is because of First Chronicles and because of Matthew and Luke. In reality, Jews were not keeping their genealogical lines any more than we are. I mean, today you can go to ancestors.com or something and get it, but you can't read the names. But
can you believe he's saying this? The Jews, didn't, keep meticulous genealogical lists. I'd love to see Nehemiah Gordon jump onto a program like this and just go, sorry, but of his, here's 1,000 manuscripts that show they did keep meticulous genealogical lists. Here's a whole bunch of extra biblical lists that show genealogies going from way back. It's ridiculous. How can this world leading scholar make this stuff up? And it's a bit like watching what's his name? I've forgotten his name. It's terrible. Dawkins. I thought Dork, and I remembered Dawkins. Yeah. It's a bit like watching Richard Dawkins. Just in some of his debates, he would say things, and the audience would laugh their head off. Like he'd say, "Nothing means something," and everyone would laugh, and he'd be like, "Why are you laughing?" It's like, because what you're saying is really, really, really dumb. It's silly. Louis says, I can't stand Ehrman. Yeah. Paragraph 1, they kept them all the way back to Adam and Eve. Yeah. I mean, if most of, even in the book of Ruth, they have, a genealogy just showing around that region. And it's just like, okay, well, she's related to David, and they go through that. If you go through a lot of the Old Testament books, it goes through a genealogical list. If you go through Genesis chapter 5, after the flood, the sons of Noah has a detailed list, and then you start getting into, when they're in the wilderness, and then when they entered in the promised land, they've got lists and lists and lists, because they're dividing everything up into tribes. And they're saying, okay, here's the borders of your tribe, here's the borders of our tribe. And so Para 1's saying, show me that paperwork. It's called the Bible. It's not that hard. Just grab the Bible and start looking at it, So Derek McClure says, hey, Nick, first time commenting. I just wanted to say that after watching your critiques on James White and Bart Ehrman, I can't thank you enough. Cool, Derek. Thanks for your encouragement there. Power of One says they don't list the one for all the female, though, do they? Females. Not all of them, but usually it's some of these things just go without saying that, you know, if it does mention a female, it usually mentions a husband. And so, yeah, I don't know what the point is there. They never kept them for all the people in the Old Testament. It's clear to me. Okay, well, I'm glad you're convinced of that. Maybe you can join Bart Ehrman in his next show and say that the Jews didn't keep meticulous records. I mean, to me, that's ridiculous. It's like saying, the Nazis were not fascinated with artwork. It's like, no, they really were. They were plundering the world for artwork and stealing it, and had trains full of artwork going to Berlin. It's like, it's just silly. So Derek says, it's so nice to hear scholarly rebuttals of these snake oil salesmen. Yeah, and in all honesty, it's not that hard. You just have to spend a little bit extra time, go through their arguments. And the thing is, once you don't see them as looking down at you from a pedestal, you sort of pity them. You sort of almost see them like a Jehovah's Witness scholar or something like that. You can listen to what they're saying without fearing that, you're just constantly wrong. And you hear them say enough silly mistakes over and over and over that after a while you just sort of like, well, I guess the next thing that's going to come out of his mouth is probably going to be wrong too. You just sort of end up defaulting to their wrong. Now, it's probably not the best thing to do, but I do default to whatever Bart Ehrman says is usually wrong. And it usually is. Like, I don't actually know what he's going to say in the very next section, but I can almost guarantee it's going to be wrong. And it won't take much to prove him wrong, you know. I mean, who doesn't know that the Jews kept meticulous records, genealogical records? You know? Okay, so Power of One's like sort of got, maybe 10 quotations here. So I'll let you just chat with that because you're sort of saying the same thing over and over and over. But that's cool. You can say whatever you want. I'm just going to continue on with this video.
You can do research and get the names, but most Jews in the Jesus day had no idea what their great grandfather's name was and let like it happen. It's certainly not their great grandfather and so. So
most Jews had no idea who they had no idea. You know, it's just quite amazing. Jews knew what tribe they were from. Yeah, absolutely.
These are made up genealogies in order to show Jesus' relationship in Matthew's case to Abraham, the father of the Jews, and in Luke's case to Adam, the father of the human race. And they're both trying to say something by that, but they're both, as you said, they're both genealogies of Joseph, not genealogies of Jesus.
Why would they include genealogy?
So it's just so strange that he doesn't know that there's two different Josephs. It's like, to me, it's like saying, Bar Jesus is Jesus in the Bible, or just something ridiculous like that. Or, Joseph, who went into the promised land, is the same as Jesus. This is so unscholarly. Why doesn't Bart? I guess the thing is that there's a deplorable state of scholarship in the world today, specifically biblical scholarship. So people are looking at what Bart Ehrman says, and many people have no idea that what he's saying is ridiculous or stupid. And so all he has to do is, just look with these worried lines on his head and his little glasses and, a whole bunch of alphabet soup after his name, and people will go, yes, Bart, what you're saying is true, without just evaluating it. And like any Jew would just laugh at what he just said. But anyway.
Of Joseph, if he is not in either of these books related to Jesus? Does that suggest that maybe they think he was kind of his father? What's going on there?
That's a very good point, and I'm going to be pursue that in my course, because if Jesus was the son of Joseph, then it would make sense to have these genealogies. But Matthew and Luke both think that he wasn't the son of Joseph. They both have to have the genealogy because they're trying to show that he goes back to David, son of David, and it goes back, to Abraham, father of the Jews, or going back to Adam, the father of the human race. So he's either, he's the savior of the Jews in Matthew, he's the savior of Gentiles as well in Luke, and so that's why it goes back to Adam. They can't trace the genealogy of Mary because in the ancient world, women didn't have, the genealogical lines. It's patrilinear, it goes through the father. So they can't genealogy of Mary. I'll say that one way people try to reconcile the difference between these two is by saying that Luke's genealogy is Mary's genealogy and that Matthew's is Joseph's genealogy, which kind of makes sense until you look at the genealogies, and it's quite clear they are both Joseph's genealogy.
It is so strange. It is absolutely so strange. Anyway, so actually, I'll let it keep playing while I look up this video.
So they want to trace these genealogical lines because they want to show Jesus could be the savior of the human race. He could be the savior, the son of David, and he is for them. But it creates a problem and Joseph, father of Jesus.
So is there anything in the New Testament that suggests that Joseph was actually viewed as Jesus' real father before the virgin birth became mainstream and widespread?
Yeah, so this is what my course is. I spent 2 lectures on this, so I'm going to give the 30-second version here. But it is interesting, not only about the genealogy, but also that there are places where Joseph is called Jesus' father. Story of Jesus.
Okay, so we're going to get into that soon. Now, I am looking for a video. I did have a link to it on my page, but I can't seem to find it. And so I'm sort of just going through YouTube, just sort of frantically trying to find it so I don't have a big, long space of dead air. But hopefully I can just find it because I have been searching for quite a while for this. And this video, basically, it's a guy who knows Hebrew quite well. So he also knows Greek, and so he goes through Luke and explains whose genealogy it is. So I'll just try a little bit more. So Power of One sort of saying a whole bunch of stuff, but there's just so much being said there that I don't want to be distracted from that and sort of miss what I'm saying here. Now, I'll go back to my website. That's a shame that I don't have that there. External links. No, I don't have that. Jesus. 1 Luke 3. Okay. What a shame. Because I wanted to sort of, I guess in a way, show this video and then just sort of stop there and then go, in the next session into the, the parents concept in the critical text, because there are places, and I'll just show you one of them. Where are we? So say Luke 2:33 here. Where it has, and Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of him, where the critical text has his father and mother were amazed. And so when you go through the narrator, which is Luke, he never calls Joseph just the father, unless it's sort of said by someone else. And it does say in Luke, let me just grab it, Luke chapter 3. Luke 3. It does say in Luke 3 that Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, and look at in the brackets here, as was supposed the son of Joseph. So it's very clear that people around him saw him as the son of Joseph. They didn't know any different. But when the Gospel of Matthew was written, that's when it was all cleared up, because people then would have gone, well, let's look at Joseph's lineage. And I'm sure that some of the Jews would have, because they kept meticulous lineage and genealogical lists, they would have gone, hang on, this guy's got Jeconiah in it. How can this guy be the Messiah with Jeconiah in his lineage? And so, yeah, quite interesting. It's a shame that I don't have that video. So I might let Bart Ehrman just keep talking while I keep searching for this, because I really want to find it.
In the temple as a 12-year-old. He's left behind by the caravan. 3 days later, they search around, they find him in the temple, and his mother finds him and in the temple speaking to the Jewish teachers, and she's very upset. And she says, "Why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking all over for you." And so, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. In the Gospel of John, Joseph is mentioned twice and is called the father of Jesus. He's the father. One of the
He's saying there is this appears in the critical text, but it's not in the Textus Receptus. Okay, so yeah, that's a real shame. So what I might have to do, I might just have to sort of leave it there, and because I don't want to just jump forward into all this other stuff. Or maybe what I could do, I could jump into all this other stuff and just put it on the back burner and show that video in the next one right at the beginning. And so then we can just jump back into the issue in Luke chapter 3 and why it's clearly talking about the in-laws. And so still searching for this, can't seem to find it anywhere. And no doubt it actually comes up on my feed, because I discovered this video I think about 15 years ago when I first joined YouTube. And it's funny, like even songs that you liked back then, you know, some weird song, they still come up. You know, they've still got all this information on you way back then, as if you're going to listen to that song over and over for the next 15 years. But this clip would just keep coming up. And so I did think that I had put it into the link there. So I might just continue on with this, and we'll look at whoops, just had a power outage. We might just look at some of the places where it talks about Joseph and the lineage.
in Mark's gospel, for one thing, for one thing, there's no virgin birth. Another thing is, already in chapter 3, you do have an account of Jesus' mother. Jesus' mother and his brothers come to take him out of the public view because he's gathering these crowds, and they think he's doing strange things, and they think he's gone out of his, his mind. And that's what it says. His mothers and brothers his mother and his brothers came to take him out of the public because they thought that he, ecstatic is the term, but standing outside of him, so it means they think he's gone out of his mind. That's strange. If his mother knew that she was a virgin and that he was the Son of God, she would expect him to be doing miracles and to have crowds around him.
Odd behavior, yeah.
But in Mark, she's not.
Well, it doesn't say that they thought he was insane because he was saying that he's the Son of God and all the rest of it. They were probably saying he's insane because of other reasons, because you're sort of wasting his time with these lepers and other people. Then why not go and show yourself to the Sanhedrin or whatever? They could have had a whole bunch of preconceived ideas of what the Messiah is going to do, and Jesus isn't playing the role, and so they're like, well, you've lost your mind. What are you doing? Why are you doing it this way? And as the Bible says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He was out in the open. He was out there preaching to people, visiting sick people by the well, and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, with his 12 disciples, it's like, well, what are you doing? Why are you choosing fishermen? Why don't you go to the leaders and get some real scholars on board? Why are you just hanging around these lowly people? And so that could have been one of the reasons. But Bart Ehrman is an expert in getting into people's minds and telling us what they were thinking at that time, because he can tell us that a scribe was having a bad day and made a mistake and because he didn't have a coffee and this sort of thing. Where it's just called making stuff up. But this is what Bart Ehrman is an expert at doing.
There's no virgin birth story. And so the assumption there seems to be that he has brothers, he has sisters, and that that his mother is still alive at that point, but there's no reference to his father there. But the assumption is that she doesn't know she's about the virgin birth, because otherwise she wouldn't think he's crazy.
So we don't have anything else really about Joseph in the New Testament. Do you see anything developing? Are there stories that develop after the New Testament?
There are some. Joseph ends up not being the main figure in apocryphal stories about Jesus, but there are some stories that are pretty interesting, talking about the infancy gospel of Thomas.
If you read any of these apocryphal works, the infancy gospel of Thomas, you're left there just going, this is just ridiculous. It's a fairy tale. You would never be convinced that Christians were persuaded by this.
Between the years 5 and 12, and Joseph appears in a number of those stories as kind of the disciplinarian in the family. He's portrayed as a carpenter in the family, as he is in the New Testament as well. It's called a carpenter, although that's a term we should talk about in a second. He's and he on several occasions he upbraids Jesus for doing things that are mischievous and not right. Early on, Jesus is making he's by the stream of he's by a stream, and he's taking some of the mud and he's making sparrows, makes 12 sparrows out of this mud, and a Jewish man walks by, and really it's a day of the Sabbath, and so you have that kind of episode, and where Jesus has this confrontation with him, and later Joseph decides that Jesus needs to have some learning because obviously that would help, and so he sends him off to teachers, and so Joseph is involved in some of those stories that are very they're kind of interesting anecdotes, and so you sometimes do get apocryphal accounts of him.
Are there any other stories about Joseph that give us more information?
Well, there's one account that is not well known. It's not very well known because it wasn't popular through the Middle Ages or down till today. It's not in Greek or Latin. It's a book called The History of Joseph the Carpenter. And it's an apocryphal story that's found in only 3 ancient manuscripts, Coptic, the ancient Egyptian language. It's an account of Jesus talking to his apostles about his father. And it's a lengthy account where he describes, he actually describes a couple of things, including his own birth and what happened at his birth with Joseph and Mary. And he's describing this in the first person. So the book is written in the third person about something Jesus is saying. Okay, so he's not writing this; he's preaching this thing to his disciples, and he describes Joseph and Mary and how he himself was born, and it goes from that to the death of Joseph, and he gives a detailed description of Joseph's death. And in this account, Joseph lives to be 111 years old, and Jesus is at his deathbed, and he won't promise his father he will protect him. And after Joseph dies, he preserves the body from deterioration, and so it's Jesus' own account of his father. So this is Jesus, the history of Joseph the carpenter. You can, if anyone's interested in this, they can find it in this book that my colleague Zlatko Pleša and I produced called The Other Gospels. And Zlatko did a translation of this out of the Coptic, so it's not very widely known. But it's a pretty interesting story.
You said a couple of answers ago that we should talk about Joseph as a carpenter. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, so that's, okay. So, people tend to think that Jesus was a carpenter.
Okay, so just before we get into that, this is a note by Jeff Riddle. So this is quite a long time ago. It's over 10 years old. But it has a textual question in Luke 2:33 is whether the verse should read his father and mother, ho pater after kehi meta, the modern critical text, or Joseph and his mother, Joseph kehi meta after, the traditional text. The primary issue then is whether or not the text makes use of the noun father or pater, or the personal noun Joseph. This distinction is reflected in modern English translation. So let's have a look at that. So the KJV has, and Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of him. And that's pretty much the same as the New King James there. So the NIV has the child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. The ESV and his father and mother marveled at what was said about him. So the external evidence, the traditional text is supported by codices I guess it's Alexandrinus, Theta, C, Family 13, 33, and the vast majority of Greek manuscripts. It is also supported by several ancient versions, such as the Old Latin and the Gothic. Metzger also notes that this is the reading of Tatian's Diatessaron in the 2nd century. That's in his textual commentary, page 134. The modern critical text is supported by Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, in addition to a few other codices. It is also supported by several ancient versions, including a few Vulgate manuscripts. Internal evidence. Metzger explains the controversial thinking. So you've got to understand, Bart Ehrman is Bruce Metzger's student, okay? His final student. And so when you're looking at Metzger, you're looking at Ehrman would have saturated himself with Metzger's concepts and material. Metzger explains the conventional thinking of modern text critics that father was replaced by Joseph in order to safeguard the doctrine of the virgin birth of Jesus. So this is part of Bart Ehrman's orthodox corruption of Christianity. And so this was a concept by Metzger as well, and many other people, that the orthodox Christians, they wanted to put the virgin birth into the Bible. They wanted to put the deity of Christ into the Bible, the Trinity into the Bible. And so they would sort of default to going, well, we think the Bible didn't have that Trinitarian verse, or didn't have that verse that defends the virgin birth, or because they were saying, well, these scribes were just harmonizing things to try and make it look like it was always like that. He also concedes that this must have occurred given the textual evidence at a very early stage in the transmission of the text. At least under this construal, this would indicate that the doctrine of the virginal conception was an ancient doctrine and not a later church development. Metzger does not address alternative explanations, Could another explanation be that the original reading of Joseph was altered to father in order to downplay or subvert the doctrine of the virginal conception? Now, I like the way that he's very specific here about virginal conception, because there can be a bit of a controversy between saying virgin birth and virgin conception, because it's sort of like the Roman Catholics have the whole concept of virgin birth, because, well, she gave birth but she's still a virgin, sort of thing. So we've just got to be careful of the terminology we use, and Jeff Riddle's very, very careful here. Could this reflect Christological controversies in post-apostolic Christianity? The tension is also reflected elsewhere in the text of Luke 2. Metzger notes that Luke 2:41, the phrase "his parents," and so I'm going to grab that in the Scion of Zion. Was it 41? Let me just see if I can grab that. Not found. What a shame. Nope. Nearly. No and no. Okay, so I'll type in Scion KJV comparisons. This is a great page, just for a quick reference. If you want to know if something is in the critical text or not. So I'm pretty sure it was 43. Yeah, here we are. And when they had fulfilled the days, this is the King James, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. Okay. So notice it says Joseph and his mother, they didn't know about it. But then when you look, and so that's the narrator saying that. That's Luke saying that. Okay. Now, someone looking on would say, oh, Jesus' father, So, but it's clearly not said in the narrative, in the Textus Receptus. But then if you go to the critical text editions, they change this and say, let's look at the NIV, which is usually diabolical. It has, after the feast was over, while his parents were returning home. So notice it's Joseph and his mother. His parents were returning home. His parents didn't miss him at first. His parents left, and so they've changed this. So let's maybe just have a look at the difference in the Greek. Luke 2:43 Bible Hub. So we'll go to the Greek here. I'll go to the additional Greek so we can see Beza. Okay, so let's have a look at Beza. So it has Joseph here. Copy that. So we can see in Westcott and Hort, the Nestle edition, they don't have the name Joseph there. But clearly in the majority text, Greek Orthodox text, the Textus Receptus editions, they do have Joseph there. Okay. So this creates an issue. This causes a corruption because Joseph is not a parent. And I know that we might use certain terminology today and say, well, this is my partner and this is, he's the parent, where it's a step parent and all that. Where clearly it says, Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. And so this is the Geneva Bible says, and Joseph knew not, nor his mother. The Bishop's Bible says, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. So very clear there. But as you can see, say the ESV, his parents did not know of it. So they have caused this corruption. And so Bart Ehrman just reads the text, doesn't give you the alternative like, the Textus Receptus reads this, or the King James doesn't have this type of issue. He's just like, well, the Bible does say, does call Joseph the parent. And he doesn't go, well, but the Textus Receptus doesn't have that issue. Because he's not interested in truth. He's not interested in you finding an alternative answer. He just wants you to doubt the Bible. And it's quite easy. All he has to do is read a modern version. And it's like, there's a contradiction. Okay, let's write another bestseller. Let's move on. And so that's all he does. Because it's so easy to find these type of errors in the text. So there are a few other places. Now, I might just crack open a few of these surrounding ones. Actually, we'll go back to the video.
You don't realize that there's only one verse in the New Testament that says that, and it may not say that. And so it's in Mark chapter 6. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus goes into the first part of Mark 6. Jesus goes to his hometown, to Nazareth, and he starts teaching in the synagogue. And the people in the synagogue are kind of looking around saying, where did he get all this wisdom from? These are people who grew up with, and they're kind of wondering, what? How did he get so smart? And they say, isn't this the carpenter? And isn't his mother here and her brothers and sisters? And it names the brothers. And so where did he get all this wisdom from? All right, so a couple of things to be said. So Jesus is called a carpenter there, but there's a textual variant. In other words, there are some manuscripts that read it differently. In some manuscripts, it doesn't say that he's the son of, that he's the carpenter, but that he's the son of the carpenter. And that's what you also find in the Gospel of Matthew, that he's the son of the carpenter. And so it's not clear whether Mark originally called Jesus a carpenter or called his father a carpenter. Matthew calls his father a carpenter, and it would make sense if that was the case, that his eldest son would be a carpenter. But it's not clear that the word means carpenter. So the word Mark uses is tekton, and it doesn't necessarily mean carpenter. A tekton is somebody who works with their hands, somebody who makes things. And so it's a word that could be used for, say, somebody who carves stone, a stonesmith, or who works with metal, a metalsmith, a blacksmith. It could be somebody who works with wood, which would be a carpenter. If it does refer to somebody who works with wood, it's not referring to somebody who makes fine cabinetry. It's in that context, it would be somebody who's making like gates and yokes and kind of rough-hewn things. So whether Jesus is called the tekton or the father, in either case, in Matthew, it's the father. If Joseph is a tekton, he may be a carpenter. The other thing about that, though, is to point out that in Roman elite authors among the Romans, who talk about various kinds of professions, tekton is understood to be a very lower class kind of profession. It's not a respectable job for the elite. And it'd be like, I guess it'd be kind of like a Harvard professor saying something about the construction workers outside his window. It'd be more like a construction worker making fine cabinets. But so it's usually thought that, that makes sense that Joseph would have been doing something like that.
So how would that inform our understanding of Jesus' kind of socio-economical background and his class status and the opportunities that he would have had based on that lifestyle?
Yeah. the tradition consistently throughout the New Testament is that it wasn't much to Nazareth at the time. Archaeologists have dug it up, and they know what it was like, and there wasn't much there. There were no public buildings. There were rough-hewn houses made out of stone. They probably used.
So I just want to go through this conclusion. Support for the traditional reading is ancient and diverse. Furthermore, it subtly supports the doctrine of the virginal conception of Jesus. It is interesting that modern criticism sees this as undermining rather than authenticating the traditional text. When one considers the anti-supernaturalist bias, not to mention the Arian bias, reflected particularly in German historical critical methodology of the 19th century, he should not be surprised to find that the modern critical text arising in that same era would prefer the readings of Sinaiticus and Vaticanus in Luke 2:33 and 43 over the readings of the traditional text. The reformers were no doubt also aware of these variations, but preferred the traditional reading as that preserved and authentic. With them, we prefer to maintain the traditional reading. So, very good post there by Jeff Riddle about 10 years ago. I'm in wholehearted agreement with that. So let's let these guys continue. I'll let them get to a point where they've sort of changed topic. Now, all they've really done is they've talked about, Jesus being a teknon, and it's like, at the end of the day, Jesus, it clearly says that Joseph was a carpenter. It says that Jesus was his son, and it was very common for people to continue on in the family business. So if your father was a fisherman, usually you were a fisherman, unless there was a drastic change. And if that change had happened, usually it's noted that that type of change has happened. But so the logical conclusion, the historical conclusion, is that Jesus would have worked as a carpenter, and he would have taken over the family business, and he would have worked as that until his ministry, and then he would have gone around preaching and done all those sort of things. And so there's no controversy here whatsoever.
Straw or cow manure to insulate them, maybe like one room shacks that everybody would live and sleep in. And if Joseph was a carpenter, it would mean probably that they would have had a kind of a farm plot to grow their own food. And then on a kind of a barter system, he would have worked for somebody in exchange for eggs or something, kind of thing. But this is a very low socioeconomic class. People like that would have been uneducated.
So it's quite amazing that Bart just seems to know everyone in the ancient world. it really does my head in. Like when we talk about like Peter, being a fisherman, and then we read through 1st and 2nd Peter, and Bart Ehrman's whole narrative, if you read his book Forged, his whole narrative is that, well, this is high-level Greek. How could he had written this? He was poorly educated. So, these people just never, picked up a book, or they never, got. I mean, you imagine Peter being one of the leaders of the church. He would have been surrounded by, people from the Pharisees got saved, or even Paul, that they would have known lots of scripture, and they would have been showing things and teaching, and it would have rubbed off on him. And Bart Ehrman, and so this is what I was saying at the beginning of this video. Bart Ehrman just has this mentality that he's in an ivory tower. These plebs are just below him. And it's sort of become like a self-fulfilling prophecy for Bart, because he goes out saying, I'm the guru of the critical text, or I'm the guru of the Bible. And this is what I think. And people just go, yes, Bart, whatever you say, Bart, and he knows, like, there's some things that he says deep down, he knows that are stupid. Like the whole concept of Jesus praying for someone in anger. I mean, that whole concept that he had, I think he was misquoting Jesus. It's just dumb. And yeah, and anyone can pick out holes in that issue, But it's like, he just keeps going on with it because, that's who he is. That's what he does. And so he will never just have a narrative that's favorable to the text or favorable to Christianity or favorable to Jesus, He just has to run with this strange reading. And even though multiple scholars have pointed out, look, this is really stupid, he just runs with it because he feels that he's sort of above people. He feels, and I guess he's self-deluded too. He has a spirit of deception. So he is lying to himself. It's like a junkie, after a while they'd start lying to themselves that they're okay, or no one knows. It's like, no, everyone knows, But so the tecton carpenter, so he's basically sort of making out that these people were uneducated, they didn't know much. Well, I mean, Jesus was clearly very highly educated. And it's quite an offense when you look at the life of many people around the world. Not every scholar comes from academia. There are many people who come from, they're born on a farm, and then, their parents just taught them, they were sort of homeschooled, and then they go off to Oxford, and then they become world-leading expert in this concept or whatever. And it's like, Bart Ehrman just has this thing, well, if you were probably born, in this lower socioeconomic situation, you would have just been stuck there. So and he uses this against Peter, against all the writers of Scripture. He uses it against them to prove that they didn't write that these books have been forged. It's one of his main narratives is that once you're born into a house with no money, basically you're going to be as dumb as a piece of dog poo on the ground. And there's nothing really you can do about it. And even 50 years later, if you write a book that's up there with some of the greatest philosophers, or it's probably a forgery, because once you're born into that type of family, you are just as dumb as a piece of dog crap. And that's sort of Bart Ehrman's mentality. And he writes whole entire books around that premise. So Jesus just being a carpenter, he's like, not that Jesus could have, understood things and thought about things. I mean, some of the smartest people who I've met are not people who have gone off to university to study Latin and Greek and history. Sometimes they can be, they can be self-deluded that they actually know things. When you meet people who are just ordinary people who are very humble, but they can understand, like I'm sure that there are people who we would look up to. I mean, I see this all the time, especially in other cultures. People who have grown up, say, in the slums of Delhi or Mumbai, but these people are almost equivalent to savants with the type of knowledge that they know, because they've just given themselves over to a certain field of study, and they know things, that they've given themselves over to it while they're working, selling chai to people, or while they're in a room full of others in a little desk, just typing away, doing IT stuff or phone calls in between. That, like, I take my hat off to people who go to university and study, and I know people who would run rings around someone like Bart Ehrman with their intellect. But if you go to their house, they have goats in their house. And these people speak like 5 and 6 different languages, that they can read the Bible in all those languages, that they not like Bart Ehrman just fudging away and just basically repeating Metzger stuff and all the rest of it. But anyway, I don't want to just offload and just be mad at Bart, but I do hate this whole thing of he's on the pedestal, he's just looking down on everyone, he has this privileged life, I'm in the academy, I've made it, and so there's a special aura about me. It's like, oh, I'm the Pope, I've got this infallibility all of a sudden from God or from whatever. And it's like, no, you don't, dude. You're wrong on so many things. There are so many things that Bart Ehrman says that are just ridiculous and wrong. But unfortunately, he has a massive audience. I mean, Dan Brown was saying stupid things for years and years and years, and he had a massive audience. And I would go out street preaching, witnessing, and people would come up to me and say, what about Mary Magdalene and this and that? And you'd be like, you've been Dan Browned. That's what we'd say. You've been Dan Browned. These many people have been Bart Ehrman, and unfortunately modern Bibles and the Bible industrial complex are teaching people to become like Bart Ehrman. The world is being filled with people who are spiritually dead, but they can parrot Bart Ehrman. And you run into them on the streets and they're like, oh, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. I've had 8-hour-long debates with Muslims who know stacks of Bart Ehrman material. They've actually memorized scripture, probably memorized more scripture than the average Christian would know, so that they can say this verse shouldn't be in the Bible. And I'm there going, no, you don't know the situation behind the Common Yohannium, or Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. But most of the time they're quoting this guy.
Hand-to-mouth existence, very close to the poverty line, or probably in poverty. If Jesus had a large family, as Mark indicates, Mark names 4 brothers and sisters, plural. So even if there are 2 or 3 sisters, you'd have, plus Jesus, you'd have 8 kids. So it's a family of 10. And they're basically trying to survive. And so Joseph probably would mainly be, raising vegetables and things, and doing exchange work for with wood.
Why don't Joseph often take place?
It's a much question, because...
Okay, so we're sort of just about halfway there, so I think I might finish it up. I just jumped onto Wikipedia, and I thought I'd just sort of skim through a little bit, because it did mention the carpenter thing. Is this not the carpenter's son? Tektonos Uios. So that's in Matthew. I'm not sure what version that is. Let's have a look. It's the NRSV, so that's probably the one that they have the issue with. So we'll go to Bible Gateway. We'll go all English versions. It is on the King James. Is this not the carpenter's son? Okay, so that's not the one with the text variant that he was talking about, because clearly, is this not the carpenter's son? Is it in the New King James? Where's the King James here? Yeah, is this not the carpenter's son? So maybe I should look at that verse in Bible Hub, so I can get to a parallel verse. Here we are, Mark chapter 6. So this is the one he was talking about. I was actually looking for this for quite a while. I don't know why I couldn't find it. isn't this the carpenter? Okay, so then when you look at the King James, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary? Okay, so he was saying there was a textual variant there. Let's see if this has any bearing on the Greek. I did assume that it would be a TR issue, but it doesn't look like it. Okay, so we're just looking around that word there. Okay, the son. Well, he's saying there's a textual variant there. Maybe what I'll do, I'll grab Westcott and Hort's text. I'll just do a bit of a search for that. So I guess if I had like an apparatus with me, I can look online, but it will take quite a while. Maybe P Greek, they might go into it. But whether the tradition that Jesus was a carpenter is correct may well be questioned. The Greek is subject to another understanding as well. The tectun signifies an artisan who may work in wood or some other medium, such as stone. This is interesting that Nazareth was not far from Sepphoris, which was a bustling center of Greco-Roman civilization. In 1931, L. Waterman made excavations of the site. To the Roman period belongs a large theatre, of which only a section was excavated. This building is of the Roman type, about 110 feet in diameter, and is estimated to have seated between 4,000 and 5,000 spectators. The stage was about 90 feet long and 80 feet wide. There were no entrances in the stage building, but it had towers at each end. So an impressive tower was made locally. I'm inclined to agree with the view that George represents here, that Jesus might very well have known some Greek. I think, however, that this question is not worth engaging. Okay, so it's not really going into that issue. So I'm sort of rabbit trailing, trying to find some material on this, but I actually sort of wanted to finish on the other video. So that's why it's a bit discombobulated is the word that we're using today. So I'm a bit discombobulated, but I will, I'll get my act together and we'll do video number 2. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you very soon. I'll just look through some of these comments. Sorry if I'm throwing them up. Okay, so Parab1 and LJ had a massive chat here, so I definitely won't be throwing all that up. But I appreciate you guys just chatting about all this stuff, and I'll go through some of that stuff later on. Okay, God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.